What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video today we're going to talk about all things HAILEY, but more specifically we're going to talk about the two Transcendant mods which were added for her with the October 10th patch alongside Ultimate Freyna and all the other goodies we got with that patch. I think these were highly anticipated, at the very least by me, since HAILEY originally launched without her Transcendant mods, which was an odd move, let's be honest. But I was hoping that these mods would flesh her out a little bit as a Descendant, as she's kind of like in a way a almost one-trick pony right now in terms of like her sniping. Gun HAILEY is very cute and very cool and good, don't get me wrong, but Snipe HAILEY is kind of where it's at. So that being said, the TLDR for those people that tune in for the first 60 seconds and then dip is that, in my opinion, both of these Transcendent mods underperform and are not worth the Kuiper and the gold that you need to invest to basically, use them in a build. Now, I know that might seem like I'm throwing an insane amount of shade at them, but we're going to go in this video, we're going to look at both of the mods in a little bit more detail. I'm going to show you some practical examples of how I tested it and basically give you my final thoughts, and sort of like maybe we can reach the same point together, or if you disagree, please go ahead and tell me in the comments. But first things first, let's dip right in. So the two mods, of course, are Supercooled Kuiper Round and Cryogenic Cluster Shot. Supercooled Kuiper Round is more for your Snipe HAILEY kind of builds, and then Cryogenic Cluster Shot is for mobbing, and it's supposed to help deal with the fact that HAILEY is not fantastic at dealing with a bunch of small enemies at once. So we're going to tackle the Snipe one first. And what you're looking at here is my cookie cutter setup for Snipe HAILEY, basically. So it has all the normal accoutrement that you would put into a HAILEY build, and basically it's what lets you pull off these awesome snipes with Zenith, as well as your second ability, Storm Snare. And it really pumps out some really decent numbers. Now, by default, you build this build to capitalize on crit, right? And so you can see a lot of crit mods here, and as well as just some additional damage mods and everything like that. It is relatively glass cannony because the idea is that you end up killing the boss before the boss becomes like a big threat to you. Now, before we put the actual mod in as well, just a quick side note here. Of course, we also need to talk about the weapon that you equip, because HAILEY's ability, or at the very least her main method of dealing damage, which is Zenith, actually derives the majority of its damage from the base weapon, and then it puts a whole chunk of its own damage still on top of that. So it's relatively important that you have a decent weapon in your hands when you activate this ability. And when we look at Piercing Light, for example, which is one of the meta options for this, of course, is that we are already building this weak. Now, why am I prefacing what I'm about to say about the mod with this? Because it's important that we know that we are already gearing up HAILEY to capitalize on weak point damage. So whenever you're using HAILEY to attack void intercept bosses, you should absolutely not be blind firing into their bodies and shit like that. You should absolutely be trying to hit weak points, because that's where you're going to get the really big numbers. And this will also make more sense once I show you the footage of us actually shooting bosses. But HAILEY's been out for a while, so I don't think I'm telling anybody anything that they don't know. So when we snap this, well, let's first look at what Zenith looks like without the mod in. What the fuck? Okay, what Zenith looks like without the mod in. So Zenith by itself, as mentioned, has a base damage. It has some additional damage on there, which is derived from skill power, and then it has a firearm attack increase amount of 50%. So that's an additional boost that it puts on top. And this is a big deal. Of course, then we have the shots, and those things can be affected by you putting additional magazine into your weapon, which will then give you more shots. So you start out with 4 shots, but you can go up with that. But the main point here is base damage, skill damage, and then you get like a 50% increase on top of that. So when we then put Supercooled Kuiper Round in, we see that it affects Zenith only, and the change that it makes here is now our 50% firearm attack increase is actually dropped to 25%. So it's chopped in half. And to compensate for that, you now have this stacking, and maybe it's good if I just move my face over here. You have this stacking buff that now increases every time you land a weak point. However, there's a little bit of nuance here. I'm not trying to make it sound more complicated than it is, but the point is it's not just as easy as stacking up buffs. How this works is you start out with 5 stacks, and each one of these stacks is worth a certain percentage of weak point damage, 9.7. The idea is that when you start out, right, before you fire your first shot, you are slightly weaker or slightly might be underselling it a bit, but you are weaker than without the mod just starting on a shot. But then as you land weak point shots, your strength grows until it's eventually more than it would be if you weren't using the Transcendant mod. Now, it starts at 5 stacks, 12 stacks is the maximum, and when you shoot, you lose a stack. So that when you pull your first shot, you go from 5 stacks to 4 stacks. And then if that shot is a weak point hit, you go to 6 stats. So it's -1 + 2, -1 + 2, like that. So you can see that after 4 shots, then you start getting, let's say, close to the max, which is 12. I think after 4 shots, if you're hitting each one, you're sitting at around about 10, if my maths isn't poo-poo. It's early. So the main point here is that if you do miss a shot, it is a massive penalty to you, because now you are not just doing less weak point damage, but you also still under the sort of like, you know, like pressure of dealing 25% less firearm attack increase if you weren't wearing the mod. So big penalty in a way for me here. It means that you have to be accurate, you have to hit the weak points. Of course, certain void intercept bosses are much easier to hit weak points than others are. We have to keep things in mind, like I think it's harder for our controller brethren to hit these shots than it is for keyboard and mouse. I think that makes absolute sense. But just in general, the point here, this is like high risk, high reward kind of idea behind it. Only the reward is not that great in terms of like the damage that you get. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play 2 examples here. We're going to do a void intercept boss without the mod, so we're going to do one just like this, and then we're just going to throw the mod in there and we're going to do another one. I'm going to talk you through it. I guess we'll do Executioner or something like that just for shits and gigs, and then I'll give you my final thoughts at the end. Okay, so I queued up Executioner first. We're just going to do it the normal standard way in which you play it. We're going to run up to him. We're going to engage our third ability to start juicing us up, Cold Fury. What it does is it gives us increased stats, and we're going to try and get up to 16 stacks, which is the max of this. We've just reached max. Now we wait for the boss to get ready, and we're going to hit him with our second ability. We're going to try and get a weak point hit here. There we go. And then immediately we're going to swap into Zenith, and we're just going to boop and boop. And that was 3 shots. He's popped, he's gone, and that's it. So this is pretty much the standard way in which HAILEY works, and this was without that Transcendent mod. Just damage was kind of cute, and this is what HAILEY does. She fucking absolutely demolishes bosses, and even though I was good at hitting the weak points there, even if I missed, I would have still had enough, you know, juice in the clip to actually drop this boss, and that's one of the things that makes it so good. So let's put in the Transcendent mod. Okay, so just to confirm, if we have a look over here now, you can see Supercooled Kuiper round is in, and we are ready to go. Same fucking process as before. We start juicing ourselves up with Cold Fury, and we can pretty much just wait until we get to our full 16 stacks. We're going to tag the boss with our second ability, and then we're going to finish him off with Zenith. So as soon as we're good to go, and let's go ahead and hit that crit spot if we can. Boop, and now we Zenith, and we go bam, and crit, and crit. Ooh, missed, and then we missed. So I kind of like demonstrated already like a problem there is sometimes you're just gonna miss those shots. I understand people playing on controller, it's even more difficult, of course, which fully makes sense. And so something that penalizes you that heavily for basically potentially missing a weak point, where if you could just play normally without having the Transcendent mod in, and you're just dealing a bunch of damage in any case, kind of seems a little bit weird. So before I hop off and show you the other mod, of course there could be something to do with like the order in which you use the abilities. That can be something that could potentially be more beneficial, although I've kind of tested it and I messed around in the lab, I messed around with the bosses, everything like that, and there's just no test case for me that I feel like I need to bring that mod in with me. HAILEY does what HAILEY does with or without that mod, and in this case paying the additional funds for someone that is maybe strapped for Kuiper and strapped for gold is not something that I would potentially advise, since it doesn't really give me that much of a benefit, if any benefit at all. Alrighty, and then moving on to the second mod, and that is Cryogenic Cluster Shot. Now this is the mod that is supposed to help HAILEY be better at mobbing. She is not really good at mobbing. It's totally doable, of course. I mean, you can do anything with any Descendant. It just depends on how much fun you're gonna have doing it and how efficient you're gonna be. So by default, she is not that efficient. Now when we throw this in here, and actually before I do that, just you'll notice here that this is a testing build that I put together. So this is neither the build that you should use for Snipe HAILEY or the build that you should use for gun Haley. I think that this is something that sort of like straddles the line between the two, and this will become an important point as we look at the mod and exactly how it functions, because I believe that the biggest downfall that this mod has is the fact that there's so many factors that you have to stack into your build to make it decent. Now, this is going to be a little bit different. While I'm talking about all the different things, I'm going to have some footage played in the background, spliced in to kind of like show you some runs that I did in 400 intercepts, which is kind of like the way how you test mobbing builds right now, and some of the challenges that we faced in there, and basically why I think this is kind of like yuck. So, any case, once we throw this in here, all right, we will notice that the main skill that it augments is your number 1. So let me actually just move my face over here. So our number 1 by default is actually this over here. It's cryo round, and its main thing that it does is it puts this cryo debuff on enemies. This cryo debuff can stack 9 times, and every stack on it gives you 50% additional damage against the enemies. This is why it's good that if you play Snipe Haley or Gun Haley, it's good to always have your shoulder cannon firing, because it's just an insane amount of damage that it allows you to deal additionally to the enemies that have cryo on them. And this, in conjunction with the buffs that you give yourself by activating your third ability, is why Gun Haley is really good, and it's why Snipe Haley is really good. This is a very, very powerful debuff to have active on whatever you're shooting. Now, when we put Cryogenic Cluster Shot in there, all right, it augments this skill, and now it turns it into Cryogenic Cluster Shot, and Cryo gets replaced by Cryogenic. And Cryogenic is different in a few ways. First of all, now instead of getting the 50% damage bonus there, you're only getting 25. So again, it chops it in half. This seems to be a trend with her Transcendant mods, so you know, it is what it is. And then there's a burst damage value there, which is essentially the explosion damage that happens when Cryogenic procs. Now, how does Cryogenic work? By the way, one other thing to also mention here is that it has now far less max stacks, right? It only has 3. And it has an explosion radius, which you can see there is 3 meters, and you know, you can obviously change this up, and it has a max range of 250%. And then this is a mouthful. One last thing is it actually changes the damage type as well, or rather the arc type, if I can put it that way. I think it's the arc type, but what I mean is if you take this off, then her first ability is a dimension skill. When you put this on, her first ability becomes a singular skill. So that is something to also bear in mind, because if you have a specific reactor and you want this to deal more damage, then it's actually going to require a reactor switch for you, right? But okay, so you can see that there's a lot going on here. So let's just unpack this. Firstly, let me explain how this works. When you shoot the shoulder cannon, it puts cryogenic stacks on the enemy. When you then shoot at the enemy, it triggers those stacks and does this AoE explosion, okay? And this is really, you know, a great idea, and the idea is obviously to introduce as much AoE damage into a cluster of enemies, and this is kind of like the reason why Freyna is good, because it's just massive AoEs that infect everything and hit stuff, and this could potentially in a way start to seem like it might be the ice version of that, all right? But it's not. First of all, what we have to see here is that there's a lot of stuff here that is very bad by default, and we need to make it better with mods. So first things first, the cooldown is 8 seconds. We need to crush that cooldown, and about the lowest you can get it is around the 2.1 second mark. 2.1 seconds seems like it's still a long time, but the point is actually pressing it and then waiting for the cooldown portrait to refresh and do the little circle thing is pretty much 2 seconds. So this is almost like 0. I think 2 seconds would be 0, but 2.1 is as close to it, and you're not going to notice that 0.1. The next thing is the MP cost, all right? It has a 22 MP cost, and you also need to try and make this either cheaper or give yourself a lot more MP, or give yourself ways of getting MP a lot, because otherwise you are constantly hitting this, so you constantly cryogenic enemies, and then you can shoot them, so you're going to be burning through MP like a fucking animal. Plus, at the same time, you're keeping your third ability up as well, because you'd be silly not to, because this gives you so much additional critical hit rate on your gun, which just makes your gun a lot more effective as well at dealing damage. Next, this also has a skill power which is very, very low. So if you're looking to actually increase the actual damage that it deals, then that's another vector that you need to consider in terms of modding. And then it's still not done. One other thing is the radius is super small. 3 meters is not a lot. And yes, the enemies do cluster up a lot together, but one of the reasons why, and please understand, I'm not trying to turn HAILEY into Freyna, and I'm not using Freyna as the ultimate measuring stick to say why this is bad, but you can even say, you know, Bunny. The point is that 3 meters is not a lot of distance for this explosion, and because it starts so low, it doesn't matter that you throw an insane amount of radius mods into this, because you're not going to be able to boost it up a lot. So I don't have a massive amount of range mods on here, but I do have some, and then of course you can also still have it on your reactor. But the point is, my 3 meters turns to 3.7 meters, and that's how big the AoE explosion is. Now that's good if you have a bunch of enemies on top of one another, but if they're running at you from 2 or 3 or 4 different angles, you're not going to hit all of those angles with this, where a Bunny has no problem doing that, a Lepic has no problem doing that, a fucking Freyna has no problem doing that. So this is my first point of contention. This radius is way too small. Okay, so enough complaining. The point here is then that when we look at the build here, there's a lot of things that we're trying to do with a limited amount of slots that we can put stuff in. We have to give ourselves you know, a way to gain MP, and MP collector is good for us here, because the point is, when we get kill shots on enemies, we're going to get energy back. But since we are playing 400s, a lot of the times the enemies, oh sorry, they're not your enemies, the allies are also getting kill shots, and in those cases you aren't getting the MP. So here energy collection can also work. Now, does this build work with just one of these two? Yeah, probably, although I find it to be super consistent having both. But if I had to choose one to throw away, I would probably throw MP collector away and just keep energy collection. Okay, then what we're doing is, alongside the fact that we're trying to drop our cooldown, we also just want to give ourselves a little bit of additional damage. So focus on chill here does both. It gives us chill damage and it gives us kill cooldown. Focus on singular gives us singular damage, which the one is one of now, and we're also getting cooldown, so those are good. Frugal mindset gives us less skill cost, meaning like it's you know, less to cost the shoulder cannon every time, and we're getting some additional range here. And then we're using MP conversion to just drop the skill cooldown, you know, by a metric shit ton. So that does, and then of course nimble fingers as well, let me not forget that. That leaves then another slot where I put strong mentality into to just drop the skill cost even more, although this might be something that you could also swap out. But then we have one little bit of survivability mod here, increase HP, and that kind of like leaves us with 2 mods. So there is you know, a little bit more things that we can do here. We can fit more stuff in, but in general I find this, okay, to be very frustrating in terms of like the fact that you have to approach gearing the character in so many ways. Most of the time when you're building a Descendant, you look at what the Descendant is really good at and you kind of like zero in on that. So if it's a Descendant that's super good at critting, you're gonna stack a bunch of crit shit and you're gonna try and crit a lot. If it's a Descendant that has low crit values, you're gonna just stack skill power through the roof, right? But in this case, you're trying to do a lot of stuff. You're trying to make it big, you're trying to make it cheap, and you're trying to make it low cooldown. And that's like 3 different vectors which all need to be attacked. Plus you need to give yourself survivability. By the way, I think I'm repeating myself a lot here, so let's move on. So then in practicality, we also have to pair this with a really good weapon. And I think we have 2 good options here for us. First and foremost, a natural fit is something like Thunder Cage. Thunder Cage itself is a fast firing weapon which reloads very fast, so you're not gonna have a hard time shooting with the shoulder cannon and then popping your shots off, quickly reloading, blah 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 blah. And the other benefit of the Thunder Cage, of course, is that it has a high crit stacking and high crit damage multiplier. By default, let's quickly look at mine here. Mine is sitting at 36%, and then with a 6 times multiplier. And then because we are running HAILEY, we get to have her third ability, which increases our critical hit rate, and now it just means you're going to be critting more, and that's really good. And then of course those crits lead to some really saucy AoE explosions on the Thunder Cage's side as well. So it's AoE on top of AoE. It's a really good idea, all right? But then I also thought to myself, and obviously you've seen some of the footage with Thunder Cage in the back, and I think like it performed really well. But one of the big challenges with this build is that you are very slow because you're activating Cold Fury, and so then you like fucking, like it slows you down once you get to 16 stacks. And if you want to avoid that, you're just rolling the whole time to kind of like make up for the speed loss. And of course, every time you roll, your stacks goes down, which affects your damage again. So yeah, and this is the problem though, right? This is where the frustration with the build comes in. you are having to activate this buff to deal additional damage. You have to shoot your shoulder cannon, then proc it on those enemies. And at the same time, because the meta right now is bunnies and Freyna, you have them running alongside you and ahead of you, procking and killing all the enemies and everything like that. So it becomes very difficult to keep up with everything. I know that it seems like I'm complaining a lot here, but I'm really just trying to cover all of the bases and just explain, because I really wanted to like this mod. I like HAILEY. And I don't want HAILEY to just be a one-trick pony. And so, I mean, dude, I'm having fun with Tow Truck Epic, and that shit's as off meta as you get, I think. But, like, the thing is, like, this, I really, really wanted to like this, but it has ended up being very frustrating to play, because the firing off the shoulder cannon, even, this is just, I'm going off on a tangent here, but the firing off of the shoulder cannon is also just annoying, because it fucking shoots into, like, debris and doors and everything like that. Like, I don't expect it to go through walls and everything like that, but oftentimes you'll find a situation where you're at the mouth of a fucking room and there's enemies in front of you and enemies to the right, and the shoulder cannon will go boop, 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 and hit like 2 or 3 enemies in front of you, and then like shoot like a couple of shots into the fucking door frame here as it's trying to hit the enemies to the right of you. So annoying. So any case, so then the point is, we're getting slowed down by Cold Fury a lot, okay? And so this is something that we can actually do something about, because with the October 10th patch, we also got a new weapon. We got Frostwatcher. Now, Frostwatcher is kind of like made for HAILEY, and the idea that I thought was like, okay, cool, so this has a unique ability, and maybe I can just go through that quickly. I mean, it has a lot going on, but basically the point is that when it procs, the long and the short of it is, when it procs, it can actually disable this slowness effect of HAILEY's third, of her buff. And so if you proc this, then you actually have all your original movement speed back, and you still have all the stacks. So really cool. But there's a couple of things about this gun which is cumbersome for this run and gun kind of playstyle. First of all, it's a scout rifle, so it's, in my mind, not really suited for this. And then secondly, it becomes really, really hard maintaining the effects of Frostwatcher and shooting your shoulder cannon and watching things like your placement in the battlefield and moving around and making sure that your shots hit and then you hit those enemies and that you proc the effects and all of that. So it's just... yeah, it's just like this, playing this shit feels like a fucking workout. I'm sweating just talking about it. And that to me is like, again, I think that there's a playstyle here that might suit some people. Some people enjoy this. I think there's a skill ceiling here to a degree as well, where you get into a rhythm where this can, you know, be fun and this can work, but I just haven't found that rhythm. And obviously let me know in the comments down below if you guys are playing this shit and having a ball. I'd love to hear it. But for me, it's just a case of like, sometimes it feels bad when you have to do like a shitload to do the same thing as another Descendant does by pressing one button. Does it mean that I want all Descendants to work that way, like, you know, like Bunny and just activating your third ability? No, not at all. That's not what I'm saying at all. But the point is this, right? Having done guides for the First Descendant for a whole bunch of times, I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, if you put out a build with this shit, exactly this, and you put Frostwatch in there, and you put the fucking cryogenic shots in there, and you make a build around it, and you run through a 400% dungeon, I guarantee you the first fucking 10 comments on that video is going to be, just use Freyna, just use Bunny. And that's because the general mindset of players is this. Like, why would you want to fucking do a workout if you can just do it easier with another character that you probably already have in your roster? So I feel like in that way, these two mods don't really add anything significant to HAILEY's kit. I just sat and complained about this for a long time now, so I actually feel bad. But I feel like Transcendent mod should at the very least either completely change the way that you play a character so that it's like a fresh take on it, or it needs to take something that the Descendant does and it needs to push it to like the fucking next level. A good example for me of that would always be something like Contagion on Freyna, or on Lepic you have Firearms Master. It takes something that the character is already good at and it says, what happens when we dial this shit up to 9,000? Let's fucking go. So in this case, these two Transcendent mods have kind of failed there. I suppose the good news here is this. Actually, there's a couple of good news. So let me end off on a fucking positive note. Hailey is already really good at dealing damage to void intercept bosses. And these Transcendant mods don't affect that in any way. She is fantastic at dealing boss damage, and she is really good at solo and group play when it comes to bringing a lot of damage to the fight. So she's not a broken Descendant. I'm looking at you, Jaber. She is not in any way unusable or anything like that. The only difference is that these Transcendent mods don't really bring anything new to the mix. That can of course change. I will however say that the developer, at least in my opinion, hasn't really fucked with like modules all that much. I generally think that once we get a module in the live version of the game, that's kind of like how the module is, unless it really is bugged or fucked up or something like that. And then I would say the other good news is that we don't have Ultimate Hailey yet. And Ultimate Hailey will have 2 of her own other Transcendent, possibly more Transcendent mods. And so those ones could in fact then be the ones which actually push her to the next limit. And it would kind of like fit the point that I'm trying to make, is that they made these Transcendent mods, but they're just for Hailey, and normal Hailey is mid Hailey compared to Ultimate Hailey. At least that's the way that the game developers want you to think. And so Ultimate Hailey would actually have the ultimate Transcendent mods that will do a lot. But in any case, that's it for the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. Let me know in the comments down below if I've completely missed the mark on these mods and they actually the bee's fucking knees and you're having a huge amount of fun playing them. Otherwise, let me know what you are enjoying in the game right now. I love to hear from you guys what you are currently busy with in the First Descendant. Personally, me, I am still busy leveling the shit out of a bunch of Descendants in 400% infiltrations. They're so much fucking fun, and also looking forward to the reactor changes which are coming at the end of the month, which is next week from the making of this video. Other than that, it's super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Till next video, fucking cheers.